morning, everyone. I'm Barb Chodos, President and Publisher of the San Diego Business Journal, and I'd like to welcome all of you to our Economic Trends event. We appreciate all of you attending this morning. We have an incredible group of panelists that will offer valuable information. And before we begin our program, we'd like to thank our sponsors. Without their support, this event would not be possible. Biocom California, C3 Risk Insurance Services, Children's Paradise Preschool and Infant Centers, Deloitte, Kaiser Permanente, and JPMorgan Chase. Please join me in a round of applause for all of our sponsors. Now it is my privilege to introduce the moderator for today's event, Mark Cafferty. Mark is President and CEO of the San Diego Regional Economic Corporation, and this is his 5th year in moderating this event. Mark and his team have been great partners, and we are so honored to have him join us today. So please join me in welcoming Mark Cafferty.
Good morning, everyone. Can people hear me through this? Okay, great. Great to see you all. Beautiful venue, and I know we've thanked the sponsors already, but thank you again to Deloitte for hosting us in this beautiful space, and thank you to the Business Journal again for pulling us together. It has been 5 years, which is a little crazy to think of what the last 5 years has felt like in our lives and in our economy. I just want to do 2 quick things up front, and then I'm really going to call up our panelists. You know, Barb and our team talked a bit about wanting to make this as conversational as possible. And we have people who will be up here as panelists today who are real experts with different lenses on our economy. And I think that's the best conversation for us to have, to really have an opportunity to hear a little bit from them and let them answer a few questions and really make sure that as you're all gathering here today and you see the economy and the workforce through the lens that you have, to hear a little bit more of what we're seeing across the region. So that's what the format is going to be like. I'll ask each of them to speak for a few moments, and then after they speak, I'll ask a few questions. I'll keep an eye on time, and I know my friends from the Business Journal will be flashing me signs to make sure that we stay on time and get you all out of here on time. I think I appreciate, as much as all of you do, that we started a little bit late so that people could network more. And we're finding that even at our own board events at EDC, is we're starting a little bit later than normal because people just haven't seen each other, and we forget how much we enjoy seeing each other and enjoy interacting and enjoy catching up. So I was asked to say just a few words about the EDC if you haven't been to one of these events before, if we haven't worked with you. Virtually anywhere in the country you may come from, there are economic development corporations. There are entities that focus on economic development for a region. They are mostly, all of them, around 60-ish years old, because that's around the time that economic development organizations spun out of chambers of commerce or cities and municipalities at a point in time when folks really wanted to focus on someone in the region doing sort of the external marketing of the region to draw businesses in. And if you think back 60 plus years ago, that was a decent strategy, trying to convince businesses somewhere else that maybe they want to be in San Diego. If you're in this line of work today and you're trying to convince a business almost anywhere else in the country to move to California, it's challenging, unless there's a real reason for them to be here. And there's obviously a reason for a lot of them to be here. We are still the largest economy in the country by far. In fact, if we took the next closest states and we added them together, they would still be just about the size of California's economy. So obviously a lot continues to happen in the California market. And here in San Diego over the years, our role as an economic development organization has ebbed and flowed and changed with politics. And it's also ebbed and flowed and changed with the needs of the business community. So we were once an entity that was actually funded by the city of San Diego, but for about 20 years, we haven't been. We've been funded by the business community because Irwin Jacobs and some key business leaders years ago thought it would be a good idea to give the public funding back to the city and make sure the city was doing what they needed to do with it, and then try to rebuild our agenda with private sector investment. So many of you who sit in the room today are actually our investors. We have about 180 businesses who invest in EDC, mostly these days so that we don't go far from San Diego and try to convince big businesses that they should uproot and come here, but so that we work with the small businesses that are growing in San Diego, because for any of you who have followed economic growth ever in any part of the country that you might come from or here in this region, economic growth always comes from new starts, small businesses growing, and medium-sized businesses growing. So that's where you want your economic development focus to always be. We still work with the city of San Diego. We work with the county of San Diego. We work with Northern Baja. We truly see this as a binational region, and our region that we work within in San Diego is one that crosses the border in multiple ways every day. Commerce crosses the border every day. People cross the border every day. Cultural exchange happens across the border every day. So a great deal of our work is binational, and increasingly over the last several years, our work had become more international as well, as many of you started to say, we need more direct flights to other parts of the world so that we can better connect to Asia and the UK. We need to increase exports in and out of San Diego and see if we can start getting more visibility in key markets across the world. So these days, we have the pleasure and the honor of operating the World Trade Center in San Diego on behalf of the city, the port, and the airport, and with key support from SBDC for those of you who know that system here in San Diego and beyond. So much of our team has an international focus on connecting businesses in San Diego to other parts of the world. But again, by listening closely to what businesses needed most, we were seeing a conversation that shifted very heavily to a conversation around talent. Our economy will continue to grow and thrive in San Diego if we have the talent that we need, if we can retain the talent that we need. And this was pre-pandemic. And the pandemic has kind of turned all of that on its ear, and that's where I'll make my transition to our panel so they can start to talk to you now in 2023 about what they're seeing in their particular sectors of the economy. So if I could ask each of you just to come up to the stage, and then I'll kind of read through who everyone is as they're making their way up. Our first speaker will be James Glassman, Managing Director of JPMorgan Chase & Company, Head Economist for their commercial bank. Next we'll have Juli Moran, the San Diego Office Managing Partner for Deloitte. After that, we'll have Miguel Motta, Vice President, Strategic Operations and San Diego Head for Biocom, California. Next will be Tracey Best, Benefits Practice Group Leader and Partner, C3 Risk and Insurance Services. Next will be Kerry Forde, Chief Operating Officer, Kaiser Permanente, San Diego. And next will be Juli Lowen, Founder and Chief Executive Officer of Children's Paradise Preschool and Infant Centers. And I know I said that Kerry and Juli would be the last two speakers. It's really interesting these days to always make sure that when you're having any economic discussion, any business discussion, we're hearing what's happening in the healthcare industry. We know what we've all lived through, and we know how that has impacted what's happening in the workplace every day. We also know how much the last few years has changed the way people see and appreciate and need childcare. So I think there are few economic or business discussions that are happening around our region these days that don't incorporate childcare, and a pleasure to have that kind of worked into today's agenda as well. But I've been asked to kick things off and ask James if you can just give us a little bit of a national perspective on what's ahead for 2023. And then from there, we'll kind of take it down to the local level with our other speakers.
So I've been working since grad school. I've been working out east all my life. A couple years ago, I'm now a California resident. I'm here for a reason. I have 3 grandsons who are, we're all Aquarians, and we're celebrating this weekend, all 4 of us. Last night I was listening to a discussion by 𝐏𝐚𝐧𝐬𝐧𝨊 on NPR. And what he was trying to get at was, he said, look, all these economists are telling us there's going to be a recession this year. He was trying to understand, how is it that we all come to this idea? It's not my forecast, but how do we come here? And the gist of the whole conversation was, well, it's kind of half art and half science. And my reaction is, it's neither. It's all about emotion. It's not art and it's not science. And in particular, if you walk in, as you walk in the doors in the front, you'll see Deloitte's, one of Deloitte's books on the coffee table, past his prologue from Shakespeare's Tempest. That's the problem we're all having. We have lived, for the last 3 years, we've lived with a set of events that we've never seen before. There is no history book that has anything like this, where you have a pandemic that's global. You have lockdowns that shut the economy down for 2 months, and then 2 years later, you're back on your feet. And then in the process, all of a sudden you have this flare-up of inflation, which makes the Fed think it needs to do something. Now, so this is the problem we have, because if there is no history, and there is no history, you might think, some people say, oh, look, 1970s, we had supply shocks, we had the Clean Air Act. That was nothing like this. What happened in the 1970s looks like nothing that we know today. And the problem is, if we have no history, models need a history to be able to figure out what's going on. And so you have to use common sense. And I feel like in my community, this is what's missing. You need to, I mean, personally, I think the only good thing about getting older, if you ask me, is that you've had more time to make mistakes, and it tends to make you humble about what we don't know. And I've never seen a moment like this where when I hear people talking, well, you know, this is usually what happens, or this is what my models say, my reaction is just close your ears, because that history cannot help you figure out what's going on right now. And here's the problem. A lot of people think, well, whenever you have an inflation problem, that means the Fed's got to be raising interest rates, and the Fed is going to keep going until they break the economy. And that's why people are worried about and talking about recession, because they think the Fed, if they kept raising rates, could eventually bring us in a recession. I don't think that's going to happen for two reasons. Number one, the nature of the inflation problems that we're dealing with are completely different than anything. They're not in my textbook. We're sort of programmed as economists to think that if there's an inflation problem, it must be because the economy's overheated. That means the Fed's got to raise interest rates. That's the only way you can manage it. But, you know, inflation can also be the result of supply-side dislocations, war in Ukraine. And when you look, so the debate going on in my community is this about the supply side or is it about the demand side? If it's about the supply side, you have a flare-up of dislocations, and then it settles down on its own. It doesn't, the Fed has no tool to fix a supply side problem. If it's a demand side problem, you would expect the inflation pressures are going to remain until the Fed gets rates high enough, they slow the economy down, unemployment goes up, unfortunately, and that's what gets things under control. So here's the thing. As you watch, the Fed has been struggling to try to understand the character of this thing. As you watch what's going on right now, inflation flared up a year ago, which is when we really began to get a sense of it. If you look at the numbers now, it's over. Inflation is gone. That doesn't mean the cost is gone. The rate of change of inflation has gone. If you look at the way we all tend to look at it, look at the price measures over the last 6 months. Inflation settled down starting sometime late last summer, and right now, in the last 6 months, inflation's been running about 2%, close to the Fed's long-run target. This is the reason why the market smells a different story in the days ahead than what the Fed has in mind. It's the reason why the Fed is turning more cautious. They may raise rates another quarter point tomorrow, but they're getting close to like getting to the sidelines and just wait and watch. The data that we're watching tells you that what we've been living with, this flare-up in price pressures, 80% of it was caused by energy, Ukraine, food, the grocery store, and new and used cars. New and used car problem is related to, we can't get our hands on the microprocessor chips in Taiwan, and the problem has gotten worse because of China's zero COVID policy, which now is behind us. So if you listen to Lael Brainerd, vice chair at the Fed, she will say, you know, normally when you're not sure what's going on, there's a flare-up that you think might be supply side, we will look through it. We'll look through it. But the problem now, and they're beginning to believe that, okay, we had this flare-up in inflation, now it's settling down. Now the worry is, but wait a minute, the labor market is extremely tight, and the worry at the Fed always is that what might look transitory today morphs into something more sustained because it gets into the wage price measures. Now and this is a legitimate worry, but it comes from an idea that was born decades ago. And I got to tell you, when I hear this story about the labor market is the potential source of inflation, I find it a little embarrassing because this is what we learn in school. Here's the thing you have to know. If you think about the labor market, unemployment is 3.5%, lowest in 50 years. Businesses can't fill 10.5 million jobs they can't find people for. Everywhere you look, you see help wanted signs. And you're seeing wages pick up. So that all tells you that doesn't that feel like there's some kind of underlying momentum going on and this could become inflationary. The reason you know it's not is if you look, who's getting the income that's generated in the economy? Where is that income going? If all of these things were telling you that workers now have more bargaining power because there are fewer of them for these jobs, and you are seeing things going up, if workers had more bargaining power, you would be seeing the worker economy, the labor economy, would be getting a bigger share of income. And when you look at the share of income that goes to labor compensation, it's lower today than it was before the pandemic. And that tells me that this focus that all of us economists have on the dangers that could be related to the job market really are misplaced. It comes from a story that we knew long ago, and I think what we're going to find out is that with inflation now settling down, wage trends are going to be settling down. All that's happening is workers have been trying to keep up with price increases. So I think for those two reasons, because the evidence tells you that the flare-up of prices is passing, and I think we're going to find out that the dangers from a solid labor market are not going to be as inflationary as the Fed thinks. They're going to start to slow down and take a look. And I think the market's already beginning to sense that the Fed might be backing off. And if that happens, I think these worries about recession will slowly recede. And you're starting to see a little bit of that. What you need to know, though, is our economy is not growing at the pace that it used to grow because of our demographics. So if our natural growth rate is only 1.5% to 2%, it's going to, from time to time, it's going to feel like, oh, this could be recessionary. That's a very slow pace. But the truth is, we're in really good shape. The labor market's in really good shape. And I really don't think the Fed has gone so far to break the economy. And frankly, all the evidence we have so far of the labor market is pretty impressive. Despite all the layoff announcements you hear, you're not seeing much of this showing up in the labor market trends. So keep your fingers crossed. I really think the year is going to be okay.
And we'll come back to you for your final thought on that at the end. I think what's fascinating, first of all, great overview, because people hear things when you listen to news reports on what's going to happen with the Fed, but you feel and see things locally. And I think the interesting thing that I have picked up on recently is the number of times someone representing a different sector in the economy talks to me about how they're doing, how their business is doing, and they say something like, "We're doing really well, but it doesn't feel sustainable to me. Everyone's back, but it just doesn't seem stable." So there's sort of like this, there's a positive, but there's a pause for folks. And I think so much of that just comes from sort of the confliction and confusion that we continue to see in numbers, but people feel in their day-to-day lives. But I think as we start to go kind of down the panel, we're going to ask each person to talk a little bit about what you're seeing at the local level. And Juli, we'd love to start with you, from whatever perspective Deloitte would like to share, but I do know that one of your areas of expertise is always the life sciences and healthcare, so please tell us a bit about what you are seeing and hearing at the local level.
Great, thank you, Mark. As many of you know, my day job is I spend all my time helping clients in the life sciences sector. So I'll start out with some observations there, and thankfully a lot of my commentary builds very well on James' comments. Our leadership just came back from World Economic Forum, and I think their readout from that was that things are cautiously very optimistic, even on a global scale. When we think about San Diego and the life sciences sector being so important to it, we top over 70,000 jobs in the life sciences sector in San Diego alone, and those tend to be higher paying jobs on average. I also really attribute that to this is an innovation ecosystem, much like what you see in Shanghai, Beijing. Boston is a great example here, the Bay Area, Tel Aviv, where we've got a business community, we've got serial entrepreneurs, we've got investors that don't want to leave this community and want to put their money back into this community, and then we have this incredible base of talent. We graduate over 7,000 STEM professionals a year from all the universities and research institutes here in San Diego, and that's phenomenal. So when we think about the talent base here, I think that's one thing that's really fueling this innovation. If we look at med tech alone, just if we looked at devices and diagnostics and technology, they have experienced double-digit growth, continued to in employment headcount and in revenue. So I think that is somewhat unique, that it's not the same nationally necessarily with life sciences, so we are outpacing the life sciences sector here in California and specifically in San Diego from that aspect. The other really interesting thing that we've seen over the last 2 or 3 years is I wouldn't have thought that people want to keep operations jobs here in California, but the pandemic was actually a little bit of a great pilot proof of concept that, you know what, maybe we need a more resilient supply chain and operations network globally, and we need to figure out how to get more throughput through our own infrastructure and also rely on have a more agile supply chain and rely on different suppliers. I've talked to a lot of companies just even outside of life sciences, and we think of some of our consumer products companies who had a supplier that they thought was a tier 1 quality supplier, and that supplier could actually repurpose and start to support the automotive industry or healthcare or a med device or life sciences company. And so here this consumer product company was left holding the bag with a supplier walking away from a contract. And so now they're on like a tier 2 or 3 supplier that isn't meeting their quality expectations. What that's done is meant, you know what, we need to build this in here. And we've seen manufacturing jobs get expanded actually in the county of San Diego. So I think that in some ways is a bit of a positive where there's a different mix of the employment here. I think the virtual aspect too has been interesting from a executive recruitment. Some of my clients have always struggled with how do we recruit a very high caliber C-suite level executive when I don't have an enormous base of Fortune 500 companies here. If they have a trailing spouse with a successful career, that spouse is like, what am I going to do in San Diego? I'm not a surf instructor. You know, they don't see this as a business, you know, community. And so I think that's one thing that, you know, I know Mark's group is spending a lot of time on working on this, but, you know, we are in the second largest city in California with a vibrant community of innovation. We have consumer products companies now that didn't exist just a few years ago before the pandemic, and they've been wildly successful. Manscaped, Chosen Foods, all, you know, so there's an incredible base of startups even outside of life sciences that have been incredibly successful in a very tough situation. So we're really optimistic. I think it's been interesting watching the global economy and how in some ways it's kind of stressed some of the things and made us get, you know, to be more efficient. We are seeing our clients reinvest in a lot of automation, reinvest in infrastructure that was probably outdated. You know, my clients especially have the margin that is a great, wonderful blessing, but it's also a curse because it allows you to operate very inefficiently. And so they have had to go and really think about how do I automate and how do I reinvest in my infrastructure so that I can support the growth that we need. So if I need to scale, I need to scale more efficiently. I've got to bring SG&A down. I've got to bring cost of goods sold down. So we're really seeing folks continue to spend at a corporate level on infrastructure and modernizing and digitizing their infrastructure. Consumer spend, you mentioned too, and I think that's where our consumer tracker has really shown that there's a trend nationally that things are positive. I think one thing that's interesting about San Diego, if we think about inflation, if we took out food and we took out shelter, inflation would actually be very low. I mean, almost non-existent in San Diego. So we have a couple of those subsectors that really drive things that are sort of unique to San Diego, and I think that's going to be interesting to watch in terms of what happens with the shelter and food. And I think, again, I'll turn it over to Miguel because he'll build a little bit more on the life sciences sector, but we are cautiously optimistic. I do think that some of our economists think that there's a little bit, despite what the high-tech industry has done in terms of these really massive layouts, you know, they may be overcorrecting a bit more than they need to be, but there also is a little bit of employment hoarding, and I think that you definitely see that here because we need this talent to continue to foster innovation with these companies here in San Diego. So, thanks, Barb.
Juli, I had some follow-up questions, but you touched on most of it in that, so I may come back to you.
Okay.
I do want to, exactly as you said, I would love to turn it to Miguel and have you talk a little bit about the lens that Biocom has right now on the industry that Juli just touched on. So during the pandemic, it felt very heavily like we were the epicenter in the nation, or one of the epicenters in the nation, of the efforts to really get us to a place where we had treatment for COVID, or we had in the early stages any number of the technologies or the scientific breakthroughs that we needed to make sure that we as a nation could survive and thrive, and as could folks around the world. For those of you who know the industry well, a record amount of investment poured into San Diego at that time. So now we are slowly coming out of that. I will never say we're out of, we're beyond the pandemic, because we're still living through it and still living with it. But for the industry, Miguel, thoughts on what it feels like locally for the companies. I know you all have been up recently to the big conference up in San Francisco where folks come together and really talk about trends in the future, but we'd just love to turn it over so that you can share with folks what Biocom is seeing.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. So it's difficult to follow James, JPMorgan, and Juli, Deloitte. I mean, having a crystal ball, they have all the data, so it's hard to follow them, right? So let me bring a different perspective here. And I'm going to be focusing on life sciences in particular. It is hard for me to think about 2023 as a trend first. I want to take a step back and say, can we take a look at the last 20 years and the things that we have experienced in San Diego in life sciences? We have developed an index that is comprised of a number of components, from investment in the region, grants from the federal government, jobs created, a number of patents. And if you were to look at the trend over the last 20 years, it is an amazing positive trend. Let me start with that. When I think about trends, and I'm going to go back and touch on 2023 in a second, Mark, and I think about the long-term trend, I personally don't see that changing. I see a continuous positive trend in life sciences in the metrics that I just mentioned: job creation, investment in the region, number of patents created. I don't see a reason why that's going to change. And let me give you some light on why I think that's going to be the case. And I go back to what I call the fundamentals of the industry, right? The same way that we think about the economy and the fundamentals of the economy, I can think of exactly the same way on life sciences. We have an amazing ecosystem that is comprised by academic institutions, research organizations, entrepreneurs, talent, investment coming into the region. I can mention a couple of data here. Most recently, we have 2021 data, $1 billion from in San Diego from the National Health Institute, $5 billion from venture capital. We have, again, talent. So the ecosystem that we have in San Diego is comparable to anyone in the world, number one. Number two, no matter where you go, the Bay Area, Boston, internationally, they always say that they may have an ecosystem, but the amount of collaboration, integration, ability to help each other, and how entrepreneurial we are, it's amazing. We are the envy of the world. So if the fundamentals are there, why would the trend change? Now we can go back to 2023 and say, hey, Miguel, do you have a crystal ball on what's going to happen over the next 12 to 24 months? I don't. I really don't. But if I were to share some perspectives and thoughts here, this would be mine, right? So one, I think the life sciences industries compared to other industries is more resilient. And the reason for that, a number of factors, I mentioned a couple here. Many investors in other verticals or in other industries are used to expect returns pretty quickly, right? If you think about technology, you're supposed to develop a product in 6 to 12 months, test the market in the next 12 months, bring revenue in the second or third year. When you think about life sciences, the investors that are sophisticated and familiar with the industry, they know that developing, not only doing the research, develop, going through regulatory, commercializing, takes many years. And while that sometimes in a normal year may be, I'm going to call it an issue for the industry, in moments like this, it provides some perspective that the investment is a long-term investment with a long-term horizon. And I think that makes the industry more resilient compared to others. So I touched on the trend the last 20 years. I mentioned I don't see that changing over the long term. The next 12 to 24 months, we'll see, but I think we can be more resilient. And I mentioned the reasons on the why, kind of the fundamentals and the ecosystem. Mark, you let me know if you want me to stop here and then go back to questions, or you want me to elaborate on anything.
Actually, I'd actually like to put a question out to you and Juli before we move to Tracey, and I think
Sure.
it will actually tie into what some of what Tracey is going to speak about. So you've all talked so far a lot about investment and industries as a whole and sort of what we're seeing on the horizon. Let's talk about workers for a moment, which has certainly come up in the conversation. We use the term talent a lot. But let's talk about how what you're seeing or what you feel you're seeing from the companies you're engaging with by way of how they're engaging with their workers these days and what's different about the employment situation. And I bring this up because our work during the pandemic at EDC took us in the direction of bringing lots of human resources folks together to just really figure out how to help the workers who were in their companies with any number of challenges that they were facing at that time. But as we started to return to work, they started to stay together and want to meet more often to have conversations about how are you retaining people? How are you finding people? What's happening when you make offers to people? All of that was changing in front of them in ways that was a bit unprecedented for them. And they found some camaraderie in coming together and really talking about what are you doing now to make sure that you keep people? What are you doing now to make sure that people know your company is the type of company that they want to work with and engage in? And I just think if Juli could give us a few thoughts, Miguel as well, and then we'll take it right over to Tracey.
Absolutely. You know, I mentioned how hard it was in some cases to recruit people to San Diego at an executive level. And I think the pandemic has actually shown that I don't need to have somebody move from New Jersey or Boston to San Diego and add that executive onto a team. I can do it and have them continue to reside somewhere else. So that's been a huge benefit that I think now people are thinking differently. I actually personally had 2 projects that we were doing for 2 pretty large life sciences clients here at the end of 2019 because they were out of real estate space. And what they wanted to do was take 40% as a target of all of their roles or jobs and say this is theoretically remote or hoteling, and you don't need to come into an office and sit in a desk every day. And you know, in one case it was a battle, and they ended up with maybe like 18 or 20% of the roles they compromised. Ironically, we had a perfect pilot that started in March of 2020 that we actually didn't need to bring everybody to the office every day, and we didn't lose productivity, and in many cases we probably increased productivity. So I think this being together when it matters, being together when there's an impact that we absolutely get value out of is what people are thinking. If it's bring the team in every Tuesday, Thursday, if it's during a certain phase of a transformation project that the company has going on, there's design sessions, there's testing, you know, there's strategy sessions, there's certain things that make sense for you to be in person. But there's certain times where we don't need everybody to physically be there. So I think it's enabled people to live within their real estate constraints and footprint, which was actually kind of a bit of a problem here in San Diego. And it's actually allowed them to continue to grow and add headcount without increasing costs too.
Miguel, additional thoughts?
Yeah, so I'm going to add to that. So when you need to go to the lab and run an experiment, you're going to go to the lab, right? So I think different industries find different situations as we go through this. A couple of data points here. So the first one, this is data from 2021. The average wage of in life sciences in San Diego was close to $150,000 per year, 149 and change, right? So it just puts in perspective the type of professional that we actually engage in San Diego in the community. And just to put it in comparison, compared to the California average in life sciences, in California would be a little bit less than $100,000. So a significant higher wage in San Diego for the reasons that I think I mentioned, highly specialized research and expert here. So if I think about these 2 circumstances, you gotta be at the lab. That's gonna continue to be the case, and I think companies are finding ways in which they can continue attracting those individuals because that's the reality of the industry. But on the other hand, you have a number of professionals, including ourselves at Biocom, in which part of attracting talent, and I know Tracey, you're going to touch on that, is what are we doing to better understand what matters to the workforce? Is it flexibility? Is it sense of belonging? Is it purpose? Which, by the way, I think the industry in life sciences is a significant, I'm going to call it advantage for us. It's easy to relate on your impact. But there are a number of criteria that these days go beyond compensation, because if you only try to attract employees on compensation, it's going to be a never-ending story. I can attract you for more, and the next company is going to be doing the same. So what are we doing to differentiate ourselves? I think is going to be critical, and I see that happening in the industry.
So Tracey, in the insurance industry, you see and work with and engage, I'm assuming, with every size business across every sector of the economy. And I know some of this is what you wanted to cover, but just first share with us a bit of what you're seeing in the insurance industry right now. And then if you don't cover it, I'd love to come back to you with a little bit of a follow-up on what you're seeing the businesses that you're working with doing these days to really try to make sure they're going the distance to find workers, keep workers, and make the workplace that they have a place that people want to be part of and want to continue to be part of.
Perfect, thank you. Talent is the #1 conversation we are having and have had for the past year or two, and will continue to have as we all move forward. What we're seeing is remote work is here to stay to some degree for every industry and every company, right? So how we adapted to that, at first it was trial by fire, right? And what we've learned from that along the way are going to be the critical steps in what we do going forward. So just know that flexibility is going to be critical to every company moving forward. So how you do that is going to be important. You're going to need to bring your A game now more than ever, because it is about how those employees feel about your company. Not what you think about your company, but connecting how what you want to portray is actually happening within your company so that you can have the best chance to retain those employees, because they do have options out there and they will continue, especially in San Diego, to have options. The ease of which they do their jobs, whether it's through technology that they use, from everything from how you recruit your employees and take them through the entire experience they have with you, right, from the beginning all the way to when they leave your company someday, and how they feel they're treated throughout that entire experience will matter. And that takes work, right? It's not something that's easily accomplished, and it will be an ongoing effort that companies have to pay attention to. Because overall, how you engage them and their experience matters now more than ever, and I don't know, is there anyone in this room who hasn't seen that, right? So if I'm recruiting, for an example, and how I recruit, is anyone in here not using Indeed or Glassdoor in any way? Right. So how you tell your brand out there through technology, through recruiting, matters. Have you connected that? When's the last time anyone in the room, have you all gone into Indeed, for example, and looked at how you're portraying your company? What makes you stand out if I'm a candidate over 3 other companies just like you? If I were just to go online, what would I learn about your company and how would you stand out? I don't know how many may be aware of this, but Indeed now has what's called a happiness score. And it ranks surveys of employees and how they feel in a lot of different categories about your company, and that is now visible for those that have a certain subscription with Indeed. So that transparency out there, pay transparency is also out there, as we're all aware of in California now. That transparency is going to be out there. So paying close attention to that and what efforts you can do internally to make sure HR absolutely has a seat in your leadership table. And they are absolutely working with you hand in hand to drive these initiatives will be critical, because retention is key.
And there are a few other things that I think you're seeing companies do to try to make sure that they're evaluating and analyzing on a regular basis, that they are not just projecting that they're one of those companies that people want to be part of, but that they really are sort of living those values. Any advice to folks on how to start that process, or what you think that process needs to look like?
I think a great experience is have a task force with people from different touch points within the organization and start to look at your end-to-end experience. You are going to learn so much through devoting that time, from everything of how you're recruiting to now I made a job offer, what's that experience? How much time does it take you to get the offer? What's that experience? Okay, now they're starting, they're onboarding day 1, what's that experience? What's the first 30 days look like? How are they feeling? 90 days, all throughout the year. How are you interacting with that employee the best you can, and how is their experience with their daily jobs? Is it easy for them to do work? What's their barrier? What do we need to learn from that? If you just devote a little time to that effort, you will learn so much about your entire business. I don't know anyone who would take a step back and say that was not worth the time.
So, Kerry, as we move to you, I can't stand at a podium and speak to any leader from the healthcare industry without feeling like on behalf of the entire room, we should start by saying thank you for all that you have done and all that the workers in the healthcare industry have done. And it's been an amazing thing to watch. My wife's a physician. She doesn't work at Kaiser. Jane Finley is one of the leaders at our board meetings every other month, giving one of those updates. But I will say to stand back and think back over the years that we've lived through, in addition to the very obvious point that it was a pandemic, that this was a major healthcare issue, that we lost so many people, was also watching our communities go from cheering for healthcare leaders every day, like going out and banging pots and pans and talking about how great they were, to me watching people stand up at County Board of Supervisors meetings and just swear at and berate our lead public health official because of the information that she was trying to provide and give. I can only imagine how challenging that is day in and day out for the people who have been trying to keep us all safe. So as we start our board meeting every month, we always ask the key healthcare leader, whether it's Jane, whether it's Scripps, whether it's Sharp, to just tell us sort of what's happening in the industry right now. We don't even call it a COVID update anymore. We just ask for a little bit of level setting of what's happening in the industry. I would love it if you could do that, and then I'll come back to you with a few more questions.
Yeah, great. Thank you, and thank you for the appreciation. It's very thankful for that. Thank you. So we are seeing right now, actually I've got some slides, so I'll quickly talk through them first. So we'll go clockwise. The slide on the left-hand side is really just an indication of the insurance that we are seeing across the country. So we are having about 70% of the population are insured, about 55% of those are through employer benefits, 15% are self-pay. Then we have about 9.2% of our population remain uninsured, which is very significant because that obviously impacts into the care that they have received, certainly right now and indeed, during the pandemic. The slide to the side of that indicates the benefits that are provided by employers. So it's going down a little bit of a trend over the last 20 odd years, but not as significant. Sorry, my battery is going, I think, here. Not as significant as you would expect post-pandemic. Can you hear me?
Can you hear her okay?
Okay, great, thank you. The slide below that gives an indication of what we are seeing clinically. And we are seeing a delay, we are seeing the clinical sequelae of people not receiving timely health care during the pandemic. So we are seeing an increase in cancer diagnosis that need immediate attention. We are seeing people that have transferred from a condition that is somewhat annoying to becoming really quite detrimental to their health and their morbidity and mortality. And we are seeing a very large increase in mental health, as you would expect. And I think that really honestly is our burning platform as we design how we are going to provide healthcare for our population. How do we make that focus on mental health as well, and indeed our specialty services, and also being able to provide timely access. And then you have a supply-demand issue, of course. You probably are all aware that we have, our EDs are busy across San Diego, and we are not seeing that abate. We've had our COVID, as you well know, we've had our flu, we've had our RSV, and so our flu-like illnesses, we are just getting to the tail end of that. But we have been significantly impacted with people coming in for healthcare. Our specialist services, we need to increase those so that we can get timely access, and we definitely need to be more cognizant of people's ability to manage and provide mental health services. Operationally, we are seeing what we are terming, the Great Resignation. People, our healthcare providers, clinicians, as well as our ancillary services and our support services, we have stretched for 3 years, and I do mean stretched. It was a very unforgiving landscape in healthcare, really pushed people to the limits. Because we had to, this was a response to the people that we choose to care for. We needed to be able to provide healthcare services. But we are seeing people say one of two things: I'm almost ready to retire, I'm going early, or I'm not ready to retire, but I'm going. and they are leaving the healthcare services, quite frankly. We, unfortunately, as a healthcare provider, are unable to capitalize on that virtual, technology, et cetera, for the most part. And, healthcare is hands-on. So people are just tired, and they are electing to leave. And we really need to do a better job of enticing people back on more flexible schedules. We need to be more agile in the working conditions that we are providing. And we really need to focus on our health science and our education folks so that we can do better in terms of providing pipelines into the healthcare industry. So I'll close there.
Could you hear Kerry on those last few notes there? I think we're going to hand you a microphone because I would love to ask a follow-up question. So it should probably terrify us to hear about the level of retirement that's happening in healthcare because of all the skill and expertise that leaves, and how critical it is to all of our lives. So a workforce question and a training question sort of comes up, and you touched on a lot of elements, but I would love to know, as we think about who we are identifying and training to become our healthcare professionals and leaders, what are some of the ways, through Kaiser's own lens, you're engaging with the community or hoping to engage with education to make sure that we're trying to address that challenge? And I share it coming from probably 25 of the years of my career working in the workforce industry, in employment and training, and sort of recognizing that there have always been challenges around a pending retirement in healthcare. And then something has always changed in the economy that's helped us kind of address it and not quite get to that cliff. But now it seems like we are fast getting there. So we'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. Can you hear me okay? Okay, great. A couple of thoughts. We are very lucky in San Diego, as you will all know. We have a very high-class healthcare system across the county. We do have a lot of clinicians who actually work in multiple organizations, and I would love to see some transparency to that. So just as an example, if, for example, I'm a registered nurse, I might have a full-time job at Kaiser, but I also might have a per diem position in one of the other organizations in town. So how might we work together so that we are capitalizing on somebody who may, for example, not want to do that full-time job plus that per diem position, working together in our human resources landscape to maybe say, well, look, we can provide 40 hours across this healthcare industry. How might we work together to do that? So people aren't choosing to leave one or the other. Because I do believe in healthcare, we have a societal obligation as well as our organizational obligation. So, how might we leverage that? We're very lucky. We have amazing healthcare colleges, and we really want to move towards a bigger and better internship program, also a new graduate program for all of the multiple arenas in healthcare: lab, nursing, nursing assistant, physician, etc. So that's something that we're really looking at doing a better job at, and there's great engagement with our local education facilities.
Excellent, thank you. And I think as we turn to our last speaker, I'll just also share that one of the things that I talked to you about, sort of our journey as an economic development organization, and where it has led us to, and this was pre-pandemic, was sort of recognizing that even when the economic indicators are strong, even when someone can stand up and say unemployment is low, none of us have to look very far to know somebody in our lives who doesn't feel that way, who doesn't feel like this economy is working for them. And for entire segments of our community, for decades, that's been the case. And so as we look to address workforce challenges, we need to make sure that we're leaving no workers behind in San Diego, that no young people growing up in this region can't see themselves in your sector of the economy or feel so disconnected to it that they just don't even think about it. That folks who are leaving lower wage jobs to make sure that they get to places where there are more benefits and better wages are seeing your industry and your company as one of those places to go, that your investment is in them. And I think so much of what we're hearing is this recalibration to make sure that we're focusing on the people who are working for us now. But my hope is that the leadership in the room and well beyond it is thinking about how we are investing in the people who will be working for us and be leading our businesses long into the future. If you have been around any discussion around the economy for the last 5 or 6 years, that our team has been part of, you have heard about childcare. When we tried to address some of the key elements of the affordability challenge in San Diego, which leads everyone to immediately say that's a housing issue, and it is. There are two other main factors that are really straining people, and these two factors became even more significant during the pandemic. One is transportation challenges, the inability to get to where people need to go and have affordable options to do that. And the other is to make sure that your children are taken care of. So not only can you work, but if you're being offered another job or a different job or a job in a part of San Diego that might be better for you and your family, you can actually take that job. And you know that you have the stability for your children to have the support that they need. So childcare, you'll hear politicians talking about childcare, policymakers, you'll hear businesses talking about childcare, you'll hear anybody in the chamber, association, EDC-ish space talking about childcare. So Julie, with that said, I would love to turn it over to you because in the past, some people may not have thought of childcare as a key component of an economic trends discussion. Now, we almost can't have this conversation without you at the table to talk to us about what that landscape looks like in San Diego. I'll end by also saying that I have an 11-year-old at home who has anxiety issues coming out of the pandemic that I never saw he had going into the pandemic. And so while he has childcare locked down, he goes to school, he has two parents who have flexible hours where we can get him to and from where he needs to go, I'm still watching him struggle. So I can only imagine what it's like for families that can't find that, don't have that stability, or struggle to be able to afford that stability. And we'd just love to hear about your organization, about that scene in San Diego, and then we'll ask a few follow-up questions.
Thank you so much. So I've been working in childcare for at least 35 years. I swear I was only 5. But because I could be like drinking from a fire hose, I decided to kind of put some prepared remarks together so you can really get an understanding about childcare and how it's impacting you and how it's impacting your company, even if you don't have kids. So it's a real pleasure to be here today and to talk about how childcare impacts our economy. In the first 5 years of life, children transition through early childhood centers through a myriad of activities that are intended to support brain development. Did you know that a child's brain is 100% the size of its adult capacity by the time they reach 7 years of age? In a high-quality childcare center, healthy brain development transitions through rich play experiences, consistent care, and amidst reading, talking, and singing experiences. But working parents often worry because we know preparing our children for a successful career is an important ingredient within the engine fueling San Diego's economic potential. A strong system of childcare impacts the future economy, but it also supports the present. Childcare empowers families to work. Productivity is also increased when parents are not worrying about their children. How many of your companies are looking for employees? A 2022 report by the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics confirms the percentage of women working today is 56.2%. The Mom Project recently did a study and determined that 43% of highly skilled women leave the workforce once they become a mother. Today's workforce is focused on raising healthy children, and thus childcare benefits are ranking amongst the top tools women use to reignite stale careers. It took a pandemic, but in our lifetimes, legislators and most importantly, savvy businesses have begun to embrace the critical role childcare providers play in stabilizing the workforce. This change can lead to better business outcomes and can play a strong role as we work to revitalize our economic growth. Childcare is a smart HR strategy because in 2023, high-quality childcare offers a wide array of services. It's not the same childcare you've heard of in the past. Did you know to qualify for a subsidized childcare program that your employees can make 100% of the state median income? That's $112,000 for a family of 4. Why is that important? Employers looking to attract top-performing employees can also use high-quality childcare benefits to encourage frontline workers to gain a higher level of take-home pay. You can use childcare benefits to attract more skilled workers into the San Diego County market. As the U.S. works to recover from COVID-19, there are a couple of things I'd like to leave you with. Childcare provides developmental opportunity as we raise the workforce of the future. We've heard about brain development, and over years we understand that. Childcare supports consolidated public funding. Have you ever thought about that? By offering taxpayers high value for dollars invested, because childcare no longer just provides childcare. We provide a myriad of additional services. Childcare supports San Diego employers by allowing skilled workers to rejoin the workforce. We reduce absenteeism, increase productivity, and deliver worry-free workdays to employees with children. Childcare providers are a stabilizing force, and your HR department should be connecting with a high-quality childcare provider. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. Just as a follow-up, I'd love to get your thoughts on something that I hear about often. Well, actually, kind of two trains of thought. One is from the perspective of, are there enough child care providers in San Diego? Are there enough, what do we need to do to ensure that we're making sure that people who need child care the most have access to it? That's one. And then the second thing I would just love to know is, even pre-pandemic, we had businesses walking into meetings with us and saying, what could I do to help address this? Should I start a child care center in my building? Should I partner with someone in the community? So I guess the first question would be thoughts on how we get to a place where we have enough child care. And then secondly, if businesses are still grappling with this and really wanting to make the investments in their workers and try to make sure that they're continuing to create an environment that people feel like they can thrive in, what steps could employers take themselves to really kind of start to engage and lean in?
I think there are two different types of child care. There's high quality child care that focuses on developmental interventions, connects parents to seamless supports, manages IEP processes, has mental health and disability support, supports dual language learners, works with children who are within the homeless population or experiencing foster care. So you have a really high quality child care component. And then you have another struggling portion of the industry that hasn't really connected to some of those resources. The Race to the Top Early Learning Challenge developed is working, I should say, to develop a high quality child care system across the United States in similar fashion as the military did in the 1980s. It was a status of forces issue. And so the kind of child care you have, when you ask the question, do we have enough child care? The question should be, do we have enough high quality child care? And the answer to that is no. It's in short supply. We really need to look as a community to develop a strong and supported early care and education profession where children and families know that the best are caring for their children every day. And then your second question?
The second one is just for employers in the room. So for people who are thinking of how do they engage as a business in supporting their workers and engaging in this issue?
I think some of the things that you can do, within your HR department, you should have information about the various programs that are funded within the state of California. The state has been, I would have to tell you, I'm proud of them and the steps that they've taken to address childcare. To address childcare that no longer segregates children based upon the incomes of their parents. Did you know that we do that in our country? That we take children whose parents have less income and we say you have to go over here, and the parents of rich kids have to go over there. When in fact there are no rich or poor kids, they're just kids. And we segregate them and separate them from each other because we have never had a system of childcare. We've had a variety of Band-Aid approaches. I think that as an employer, there are going to be times where you're going to have to grapple with how will I participate within childcare. I know the San Diego Union Tribune ran an article this weekend that talked about what San Francisco did, where they put together a 3.5% occupancy tax. It's kind of scary for everybody, but think about the benefits that your workforce can connect to when they no longer have to worry about their children. The productivity increases that your workforce will be able to connect to when they know if I've got a simple hearing or vision or an IEP appointment, my child care provider is taking care of that. I can show up, sit down and meet with the professional, pick up my child, grab a bag of food if I'm struggling, and diapers or wipes, they've got me. Everything I need is right there, and I don't have to be spending my day as an employee trying to connect myself to all of these resources. So I think it's an industry that people don't quite understand how we have become the new childcare. They don't understand how the majority of my teachers are credentialed. It's changing, and I think that as providers like myself take the time to get out and start talking to you and telling you what we do, and sharing with you the the lives we change. We were open during COVID. We helped the grandmother who was left with her 3 grandchildren. She didn't miss a day of work because we lined up food, we lined up clothes, we helped her get them in school, we helped her connect to the resources that she needed. When the father breaks down on the freeway, he's not going to go to work tomorrow because his car is broken and he's going to have to catch a bus and try to pick up the kids. Our transportation department shows up, changes the alternator. He didn't miss work. And it's those types of supports that I think once employers understand what we actually do, I really do think that the support in the room is going to really hit the top of the percentage.
Thank you for that. One thing I wanted to add, and this is something that I'm sure you're aware of because you touched on it, it's probably something James will appreciate as well. So years ago, I remember seeing a great presentation on something referred to as the Heckman curve, and it's actually a curve named after a Nobel Prize winning economist. And what it shows us is, and there's a lot of finance folks in the room and a lot of people who manage other people's money, it shows us that when we make investments too late in life, so when we make interventions at the high school level with internships, or even later during adult life with training programs, they absolutely have a benefit. But if we make those investments when children are ages 0 to 5, if the focus is at that level, the curve that you see as far as their trajectory for success in life, in every imaginable way, goes off the charts. In a way where everyone, if they were looking at it as their finance portfolio, would say, that's where I want all my investment over the long term, because that's where I know it's going to pay off. And we don't, as a society, do that the same way. And so I hope, as you describe the system that historically has been disjointed or has had a Band-Aid approach, that the models that you talked about of that high-quality childcare are ones that we all begin to think about when we think of the growth of our region. And so when we see new developments coming into fruition, and we talk about what businesses are going to be in there and what the open space will look like, more and more that conversation is saying, will there be childcare in there? Will there be housing in there? Will that housing be affordable? And that may make things take longer, but it also makes things better. And I think we've all got to kind of keep an eye on working together to get to better solutions. I'm going to come back to James, and it's going to go right down the line. In the past, we've kind of ended with a thumbs up or a thumbs down, like how do people feel the economy is going to be in the years ahead. I would prefer to just ask each of you to just sort of leave folks in the room with one thought that you want to share. So something about the economy that relates to what you talked about before, or something that you didn't get a chance to say that you just want to make sure you don't miss the opportunity to say before we wrap up for the day. And James, I'll turn to you first.
Okay, just one thing before I do that. The elephant in the room of all of this discussion about workforce issues, just a second, the child care issue, the elephant in the room is all about our demographics. So just to give you a number, until 15 years ago, 2008, if you look at the population in our country that's working age, call it 16 to 70 years of age, was growing about 200,000 a month. And that's what we've known for a long time. That's why we all thought you need to have job growth of 200,000 a month in order to keep everybody employed. Now, over the last 15 years, that has slowed down dramatically. And you know what it is right now? That population, 16 to 70, is growing 25,000 a month. The biggest change is happening, and the school system knows about this. The biggest change is the 20 to 30-year-olds. So they were, until about 5 years ago, that population was growing about 50,000 a month. Now it's declining 50,000 a month. So when you see help wanted signs, that's part of the story. So see, I never thought as an economist I would have to think about demographics, because we always found that if we have the jobs, the world comes here. But we're not getting that. And this is why we all know that the answer to this problem is immigration reform. We're not going to get it because it's politically very difficult to figure out how to get over the hurdle. And that's why the only real answer, aside from innovation and moving jobs offshore, is to give our own population better choices, better options. And that's why this child care issue is really a big part of that story. So anyway, I would just say there's always something to worry about. The conversation of the day is never the interesting story, as I've learned over my working career. And I really think the way I think about something remarkable is going on. We are the luckiest generation. There's no generation earlier than our generation that has enjoyed the kind of economic prosperity that we have. Not everybody, but on average. And I think there's a reason for that. We've had relatively stable geopolitical environment. We've done some major transformation of our economy, which works better. There's all kinds of innovation going on. And I think this story is reflected in the equity market. This is why the equity market today is valued relative to the size of our economy, far beyond anything that I ever learned in school made sense. Even though we're down 15% from the peak of last year. And I think all of these things that make us realize there's something important happening are kind of echoed in that. And I don't think there's any reason to believe that this isn't going to go on quite a long time, because we're in the early days. It's not just about us so much anymore. It's about the rest of the world around us has realized that if you connect to the developed economies, there's a lot you can do to raise living standards. And I think this is why, our business community, the world, the reason we're having trouble finding people, you would think if our population is slowing down, the demand for things made in America would be slowing down. They aren't, because what we make in America, the world wants also. Same for Europe and Japan and Korea. So I really think that if you could just look beyond the conversation of the day, we've learned a lot about our economy and all the good things that have been going on. The globalization trends that have been driving a lot of this did not end with the COVID crisis. They're just, to me, all that's happened is we're sort of restarting a lot of other, the innovation that's coming from this is going to be pretty impressive. And I really think we've got a lot to look forward to in the coming decades.
Thank you. And Julie?
Great. One sector we didn't really talk about is the defense sector, and I've learned a lot from my colleague Dixon Smith about what that means to San Diego. So I think that's a big positive. Every time the Navy adds a single ship here, it's thousands of civilian jobs. It's also a crucial part of our national security, and so what they are doing and investing here is an incredible positive impact on our economy. The other side with healthcare, the administration has had a stated objective that the US, they want to increase competitiveness globally. The amount of research grants that have come to San Diego in 2021, I think the number was about $1 billion from NIH and almost 70-some million from NSF. That's incredible. The spend out of UCSD is now larger than Harvard, Stanford, or UCLA. So the optimism there in terms of product innovation, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years from now is incredible because of this investment here and the innovation. But the flip side of that is what Kerry talked about. We have a healthcare provider employment crisis. The resources, I can't do a heart valve replacement if I don't have the cath lab clinicians to be able to execute on that procedure. I can't do spinal surgery or knee replacement. So we really do have a labor crisis that is actually a negative to some of our product companies that are here in San Diego that is really hindering their return. We've got a positive in terms of diagnostics, personalized healthcare, and shifting that spend to prevention just with the companies, but then we've got the other side of it. So it's a positive negative, I think.
Thank you. Miguel?
Thank you, Mark. So a couple of thoughts here. So despite the uncertainty for 2023 or the next 12 to 24 months, I want you to remember the fundamentals in life sciences have not changed. I don't know if the current uncertainty is going to last 6 months, 12 or 18, but I think it's a growing and thriving industry. That's number one. Number two, when I talk to companies in life sciences and they ask me, yeah, but we don't know what's going to happen over the next 1 year or 2 years, what would you recommend? So I just share with you what I hear from them. Go back and focus on the basics. If you really focus on your research pipeline, if you are making sure that you're addressing an unmet medical need, if you have or you're building a strong management team, if your intellectual property is in place, you're going to do fine. Capital is there. It is true that it's, sometimes when these moments are happening, investors are more cautious. But if you have the basics in place, capital will be there. And if you navigate this current situation, if you weather the storm, for lack of a better term, you're going to come out stronger. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Tracey?
We're seeing, am I not on? Can you hear me? Yep. We're seeing companies continue to invest in their people. We're seeing them continue to want to absorb increases so that their employees don't have to. I think that's going to continue, but even more important than that, we're also seeing them want to invest in areas that help their employees be able to focus when they are at work and feel good and know that their kids are taken care of, that their needs are taken care of, and it's fairly easy. They can rest and they can focus when they are at work. So things like that are gaining a lot of attention, and we're all talking about this, are mental wellness services benefits, top of mind for employers to deliver to their employees. And not just, hey, we have a new app that's going to deliver this and this, but how does that actually work for them, right? Is it actually working for them? So taking time to explain and communication campaign is key, so that your employees understand what they have access to, how it works, and you're doing follow-up to make sure it actually is working. Otherwise, you're giving them a service and paying all this money for something that's just maybe a stress to them at the end of the day. So is it working? Financial wellness, also another big topic for companies. So looking at what you're doing financially to help your employees navigate in this tough world for some people, right? Do they have a financial plan? Do they even know who to go to for a financial plan? And just making sure they have the tools and resources they need to make sure their families are secure. Another area we're looking at is personalized benefits, right? So we all offer core packages, but also offering the ability for people to purchase things that matter to them. So a more robust package, whether that's voluntary or something that you're able to pay for, but making sure you understand the needs of your workforce and you're being holistic in your approach to what you're offering them. And what we talked about earlier, I'll just leave you with is I can't encourage you enough to focus on that experience. It is going to be critical for you, and understanding how it all aligns with your internal culture and then your external brand. And the employers that get that really right and get an A grade are going to continue to thrive.
Thank you. Great feedback. And Kerry?
Great, thank you, Mark. Really to tag on to Tracey, we're certainly at an inflection point in healthcare. Those solid benefit programs, standard programs, aren't enough to keep people in the workforce. And I think to Tracey's point, individualized, personalized plans, what is important. And we have all of these people that can really guide us as we start to plan out what will healthcare benefits look like, what keeps people in the workforce, what can we do to be agile to make it very personalized is our next real big action actually in healthcare.
Very well said, thank you. And Tracey?
And what I'd like for you to think about is when you see your child and they're born and you think, oh, I want the best for them. And then imagine your child one of two places. You can imagine your child in a place with supportive staff that are educated, well-trained, that have regulations and goals and games and fun and activity. Look at the picture, I can't even describe it. That's why I just used my slide for pictures. Imagine your child there. And then imagine your child at a center that we just shut down in Ramona, California, where when we pulled the sink out of the wall, we literally had hundreds of roaches running everywhere. When we came into that site, we saw children sleeping on the ground with no sheets, no mats, up against baseboard that had tape. And you think, well, we've got licensing. How has that happened? There are thousands of centers across this country that are in same condition. And when you're thinking about walking into your office and you see those multi-million-dollar pieces of artwork, I want you to ask yourself, what do I value? Do we value our children? Are we willing to give our children a chance to start and create that amazing workforce of the future? How, ultimately, are we going to support our workforce with that experience on site when they're worried about their children every single day? And where is my child? Are they eating healthy? Are they happy? Are they having fun? Are they learning? Are they growing? It really is something that this world has got to grapple with. What are we going to do? And who do we care more about? Do we care about our companies or do we care about our kids? Thanks.
Julie, thank you. I think I called you Tracey as we was making the introductions. I forgot I have a panel with two Julies, not two Traceys. So, but Julie, thank you so much for ending on that note. Let me just do three final things. First of all, let me thank our panel, and if you could all join me on that. I actually love talking to people. I have since I was a little kid. So when Barb and folks ask me to do things like this, I enjoy it a lot because there's a couple of you who I get to meet with every once in a while, and there's a few more who I don't get to hear from quite as often. And it's always great to hear what you have to say, and always great to capture a glimpse of someone else's look at the economy and the community around them. And I think that's what the Business Journal continues to bring to us. So I also want to thank the Business Journal. Would like to thank all the sponsors and especially Deloitte for hosting us here again today. So if I could get a round of applause for that as well, that would be great. And since I have about a minute and a half, and I still have the microphone, I just want to end with two quick thoughts. I think one of them stands out to me every time I've done this over the last few years, and that is there's been so many negatives in the pandemic that have hit all of us. Tragedy, I mean, really, really difficult circumstances. Yet what's interesting about it is one of the things that may be a positive from it is that dialogue about our economy didn't used to sound quite this way. It didn't sound like people talking about their workers. And if they talked about their talent, it almost seemed in like a superficial level. It wasn't about the investment in them. It wasn't about finding them. It wasn't about retaining them. Now it's all about that. Now it's all about that. And so I think maybe it took that for us to grasp the real cornerstone of our economic growth, the real cornerstone of San Diego's success, and any economy's success for that matter, is our people, all of our people. And I think that comes across loud and clear when we have these discussions. The other thing that I'll say is there are a lot of people in the room who run organizations, lead teams, manage big, big operations. And I always think back to something that my mentor back in Boston told me many, many years ago. And that is that when she told me, when you become a supervisor someday, Mark, you're going to have the ability to make sure that when people walk in the door every day, you can make their day better or worse. You can really try to build an environment that they want to be part of, or you can be one of those people that they just cringe thinking about walking in and seeing each day. And we all know that we've seen those scenarios in our careers. We all know the different people who we've seen along the way who treat management and leadership that way. But another thing that an important person in my life once told me, that I always function with the assumption that everybody is going through more than we realize. And now more than ever, that is true. So it's a lot of power in your hands when you lead organizations, you lead teams, and you lead operations. And so I know there's a lot of wonderful people in this room. Continue to do what you can to make those days better for people when they walk through the door. And I guarantee you, when we talk about what San Diego needs to create a world-class economy, if people feel like that's the workforce, that's the opportunity that's meeting them when they walk through the doors, we'll have it, we'll keep it, and we'll always have it. So thank you. It's always an honor to get a chance to be here, Barb. I appreciate it. And thank you again, and I will end the program at this point. So.